Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We'll be getting started in a moment. First, I'd like to go over a couple housekeeping items. We're currently recording today's webinar, and we'll be making that available to you tomorrow, just in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with any of your colleagues. If you have any questions over the course of the presentation, please put them in the questions box near your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll be sure to answer them after the demonstration. I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to our presenter today. Rob McDonald is our VP of Product Management here at Virtru and has been with the company since late 2013. With over 18 years of experience, Rob has consulted with corporations to help them assess their current information security position and develop a plan to not only mitigate the discovered technical shortcomings, but more critically to raise security awareness amongst their employees. Rob holds a BS from the University of Texas at Dallas in computer science and is a perpetual student of technology, information security, and privacy practices. Today, Rob will be discussing modern financial data protection trends and requirements, some key email protection considerations, and then he'll be showing you how your organization can easily protect and share regulated or highly confidential data with confidence and control access, even after messages have been read or forwarded. Okay, I think we're all set. Let's get started. Take it away, Rob.
Hey, thanks, Emily, and thanks for everybody taking the time today to come chat with us. I do really appreciate it. So before we dig in, I just want to set a few agenda items. Today, we're kind of going to go through those data protection trends just in general. We have some important key email protection considerations and checklists that I think you'll find very helpful. And I'll give a demo and talk through a couple of success stories, finally followed up by Q&A at the end. So before we can really dig into some of the meat of this, let's go start with understanding what are the security trends and requirements today. What are impacting organizations like yours, and what can be done and is being done today about that. And really, there are a handful, but three primary categories today that are driving data protection needs in finance as well as business at large. One category is really regulatory compression, right? So whether it is the letter of the regulation or the spirit of the regulation, PCI, GLBA, GDPR, and emerging artifacts of these either directly indicate the need to protect data where you maintain ownership of it using encryption or some standard related to it, or they insinuate or indicate or educate that you need to use industry standard best practices to support that. Well, today, that really does mean next generation data protection. Related to that regulatory compression is really what we call financial or business IP protection, right? So high profile leaks today, breaches, data exfiltration events are all leading organizations, whether that is those ahead of the curve or those following a breach after the fact, to the awareness that protection of that data both within the organization, not just when it's being shared, is really critical to ensuring that when and if a breach does take place or an exfiltration event happens, that data is protected, ensuring that you can gain control of that intellectual property even after it's left the organization. And whether organizations have already made the decision or at that juncture today to adopt cloud ecosystems, there's really a shift in what that means for current security controls and technology information security environments. And that's because these cloud environments really destroy the perimeter, right? There is no longer this monolithic concept of a network in which you contain all of your information, right? That perimeter, that legacy construct is not what it used to be. It means something different today. That data is moving within environments that you don't directly manage, and it is being used by your users and external recipients in many different cloud environments. So that means the data itself is fundamentally now the unit of control. That is where the protection needs to apply to ensure that as it's moving in and out of the cloud, cloud to cloud, from an organization tenant that you manage or one that you don't, that data is protected. So the key takeaway there is regardless of whether you're at the point of making the decision to move to the cloud or have already. It's important to understand what legacy constructs like Perimeter no longer mean the same thing today, and how you have to think about data protection today differently than you used to in the past. You know, we've got a lot of great customers that we have worked with, especially me being in product management, and I've learned quite a bit, and I always really appreciate working with organizations. You know, one of our organization they had done their due diligence and were making their move to Office 365, really begin to dig into where is my data, what sensitivity level is it, and do the controls provided by this environment, this Microsoft environment, meet all of our real sensitive needs. And through that due diligence process, they began to realize that no, additional layers of protection are really critical in order to protect that data both inside the organization and outside the organization, and really having one common fabric in which to manage that protection as it transitions between those two contexts. And this is really important to think through, because it's easy to just look at these cloud environments and see the security offerings that they have. And while they've done amazing things over the last decade to really give the consumer amazing protections against threats, advanced threats, and exfiltration techniques, it doesn't mean that that in and of itself is all that you need to give yourself current and future security posture that allows you to protect your organization from the threats that exist. So it's funny, we've heard this, for more than 10 years now, or longer than that. Email is going to be dead. Email is no longer the thing that's going to be used by users. It's going to die. I've heard it 100 times, but really today, even today, and I don't see this changing anytime soon, email is still the primary means to share information and communicate. And it's really easy to know why, right? Because everyone fundamentally has a grasp on what email is. It's easy to use, and you can exchange a great deal of information very quickly and get back to your job, right? So because of that, it really meets a lot of the needs of users and organizations. Unfortunately, it was not fundamentally built with security in mind. So because of that, and because it's so proliferated amongst consumers and businesses today, it's still one of the primary exfiltration or data leak vectors that we find. So when you see organizations on the news that have had a lot of their sensitive information leaked, unfortunately, even today, even with all the awareness campaigns that take place, email is still one of the primary vectors in which that exfiltration took place. And because we don't expect a decrease in email utilization, we really are seeing these organizations make email even better today and make you want to use it even more by all the integrations and add-ons and third-party integrations. We expect that to increase. We don't expect it to decrease. So it's important to remember that common mode of communication, those that do not have your best interest in mind know this as well. And because they know this as well, it's going to be a primary attack vector. 44% of these respondents in this survey indicated that they have not implemented an email encryption solution. And knowing the numbers and still seeing a disparity like that makes you wonder, why is that the case? Why do we have this known attack vector that's commonly exploited, and we still don't have the data protection, the email encryption solutions in place to help protect us against those threats? Why is that? Well, fortunately, there's enough data now, and there's enough experience over the last 10 plus years for us to really drill in on why that is. And I think this will resonate with a lot of you. I hope it does. So another survey along the same lines kind of highlights why that is the case. And a lot of it is because some of these legacy solutions, especially around encryption, have a complexity factor and an end user complexity factor, not only administration and deployment, but also the end user, especially the end user, that makes the ease of use nowhere near what it needs to be to gain the adoption necessary to consider it an actual tool in your toolkit for your security program. I mean, you have to remember that if a tool or a process isn't used, you can't count it in your security posture. While the technology may be strong, if no one's using it or they're circumventing it, fundamentally it's not doing you any good other than taking a little money out of your bank every year. You know, we have a lot of conversations with customers that I appreciate, you know, very much. And one of the CISOs that we had interviewed and discussed this exact problem with, he had indicated to us that they had gone through 3 or 4 different email encryption solutions and still got nowhere near the adoption rate they needed. Still, people were still sending things in the clear. People were still circumventing the process. And you have to put yourself in the end user's perspective here. If their primary job is not to protect the email, even though they know it's a regulatory requirement in some cases, well, maybe they don't know sometimes. There are still these education initiatives that are very effective. But nonetheless, if it's not their primary motivator, it's not their primary job, and they've got this work to do all day long, and every time you're asking them to protect that content, it adds 10, 20% to every activity they do, it's very frustrating. And it's going to motivate, it's going to ultimately result in the failure of that solution, because that user will get their job done, because that's what is ensuring their paycheck, and they will fundamentally circumvent that solution. Critical here. I mean, you can see that ease of use in this survey outranked a lot of the other categories by a significant percent. It's really, really important that when you're looking at a solution that you take into consideration the end user's perspective and their ability to consume, use, and engage with that product. Because without that, you will fundamentally fail in your implementation of that solution, which is supposed to help you protect the data that's really important to you. Having that end user in mind also increases morale. When that user knows that you're taking user experience into perspective, they will then take a higher initiative to use that product, because they know you're doing what you can within the wheelhouse of current and modern technology. You cannot minimize these factors when thinking about your data protection program and vendor analysis. So really, if you think about the landscape today, we've talked about why some of these solutions are not adopted, or why there's an issue, or why there's a disparity between known attack vectors and lack of deployment of technology that's supposed to protect against those attack vectors. I think it's important to maybe take a step back and also talk about what's available today. So really, in the well, I say legacy and modern email and data protection industry, there's 3 categories of data encryption or email encryption solutions. One of which that I know you're familiar with, whether you are directly familiar with it or not, or directly engaged with it or not, is what we call, or what I would call generically, an SSL or TLS based solution. And when you go to your bank's website, or you go to your doctor's physician portal to get your results or to look at your bank statement, when you put in that website and it has the HTTPS in the address, that means, if properly configured, of course, you have to trust these vendors to properly configure their environments. That means that when you land on that page, all the data that you're exchanging to and from that server, that location, that website there, while it's in transit, while it's in movement from you to the organization, or the organization back to you, it's encrypted. What does that not mean? What that doesn't mean is that after it's gone to the other side and after they've stored it, you don't know whether they're storing it protected or encrypted at rest. You don't know if they're taking that data and storing it somewhere else on another server unprotected. In the case of an email, each of the email servers along the way to the ultimate recipient, sometimes there could be multiple hops, multiple destinations along that path. Each one of those could fundamentally be storing a copy of that email unprotected, because SSL and TLS in this instance really only ensures that while that data is in motion, it is protected. Not to minimize this, this is a cornerstone of the internet today and it's very important, but on its own, does it give you what you need to meet the modern threats? Another category is what we would call portal-based, and portal-based or store and forward solutions is really a combination of two technologies, two general technologies. It's a combination of the SSL TLS we discussed and an additional location for a copy of your data to be stored. So to walk through a scenario where I send a recipient an email that needs to be protected, that email would be stored on this secure gateway or secure server or secure portal. And then the recipient would ultimately just receive a link back to that website, back to that portal, where they would create another username and password, added to the long list of username and passwords that are needed today. And then once they create that account and log in, they're presented with what looks like another inbox, if you will. So from there, they can read the email, they can reply. But the key takeaway here is that a copy of that email is being stored on that secure portal server or service, right? So you have a copy of your email, either stored unencrypted or encrypted. It's only protected in transit up to that device. It is not protected end to end. So you have a higher exposure area along that path, and you're imposing an additional username and password constraint on the recipient, more complexity, right? And the third category has been around for really since the dawn of encryption, modern encryption, and that's really end-to-end data protection. And what that means functionally is that where the data is created, it is protected right there, and it stays protected all the way through that delivery pipeline to the recipient. That means that nowhere along the way do any of the vendors or machines or software have access to that content. That means you don't have to trust each of those pieces of technologies and vendors along the way. You are protecting it from the sender to the recipient. It's a cryptographic contract between that sender and recipient, allowing you to gain more control and more integrity over who has access and under what conditions. So if you look at those three categories and you think about what you're doing today or what you've done in the past, and you overlay current attack vectors and current threats that we discussed earlier in these slides, you have to think to yourself, is what I've been doing enough to give my organization a security posture that will protect us into the future and give us the ability to claw back or control that data if there is an incident? Modern email encryption requirements, modern protection really has a couple of key considerations that I think you need to think about when you compare with what you're doing today or what has been worked in the past compared to what is needed today. And really, let me just walk through these real quick. One is seamless user experience. We talked about this earlier. It's a key indicator in many surveys and many discussions with organizations. If your users can't or won't use it, it's not fundamentally going to protect your data in any way. It's going to be circumvented. It's a critical link in this chain when making a decision. End-to-end security. You saw the comparison between the three categories of data and email protection. When you can protect that data where it is created and you can ensure it's protected wherever it's stored along the way, you have a higher degree of control and you have a higher degree of protection. This ensures that you do not have to trust 3, 4, 5, 6 different vendors and parties along the way. You are sending and protecting that data from the sender to the recipient. It's the pinnacle of data protection or data encryption. Audit and access control. Okay, I've protected my data. Now what? Now that I've protected that data, it's kind of important to be able to do something with it. Can I see who has access to it and under what conditions? Has something changed in the way we're sharing this content and now I need to revoke that content? Maybe there's a regulatory change, or maybe there is a project scope that has reached its end and those individuals no longer need access. Whatever the event, the important thing here is that you have the ability to audit and control that access. It's your data. And it's either your data or it's data that you are responsible for directly. Internal sharing controls. So again, it's easy to think about protecting data only when it's leaving the company as the most important thing. And while that is important, you still have a ton of data inside your organization. Having a seamless framework to protect that data both internally and externally is critical. A lot of these exfiltration events or exploits are pulling data right out of internal environments. Would you rather that data being pulled out in the clear or encrypted? And painless administration. Really, we consider this an important factor because we're trying to do more with less these days. It's important to squeeze as much productivity and efficiency as we can because we have increasing regulatory requirements and complexity in the market while having to do more with the same or less resources. So ensuring that you're picking a solution that not only is easy to use for the end user, but from an administration perspective, you can deploy, manage, and report on with a relatively painless experience. Really important, especially when you need to pull some of those forensic reports. So if you think about these traditional portal-based solutions, if you remember, if you go back, portal-based solutions are having a copy of the email and sending a link to the end user. They fundamentally lack the user experience that gains the adoption that's necessary. They require additional passwords to be created. They require links to and clicking out of the experience of the inbox. They do not give the user experience that you would expect. And this has been shown in some of these surveys, otherwise the adoption would be higher today. It's not true end-to-end security. You're trusting that vendor to store a copy of that email and then send a link out. You're not giving yourself full control of that secured content from the creation all the way to the recipient. So who's creating it, who's consuming it. It's not end-to-end. Audit and access control. While a lot of these portal vendors do give you the ability to report on it, it's not easy to use. End users don't have the ability to revoke or see who has access and under what condition. Or there's limited ability to see and control these recipients or who has access. Or it's tightly bound to very punitive controls. So this is back to the ease of use portion as well, right? So their enforcement engines are typically very punitive and not very user-friendly. And because of that, sometimes these control features that they do have are not even implemented fully. Oftentimes, these portal solutions are deployed and don't have the ability to properly secure those internal emails and data we were discussing earlier. Remember, it's important to secure both internal and external. Both of those data silos or data contexts are subject to attack and breach. And administration. Historically, a lot of these solutions have not focused on end users or administrative burden and friction. They've only focused on the technology, and fundamentally this results in very time-consuming training sessions, very time-consuming deployment and long deployment windows, and complexity around the rules that make it hard to understand if it's actually enforcing what you expect it to enforce. So Virtru, our solution, our end-to-end protection solution, is really built from the ground up to focus on ease of use and overcoming some of these critical checklist items that we just discussed. We give a seamless end-to-end encryption experience on demand or policy driven right in the user's context. We allow for additional control capabilities to ensure that you only give access in the window that's needed to who that it needs to access it. And we give clear visibility into who has access and under what conditions and have they accessed it. And within that same context, the ability to control. Revoke. I think it might be useful now, instead of just talking about some of this, just to show you what this solution looks like. Before I do that though, Emily, did you have, I think you had a poll you wanted to send out?
Yeah, let me actually just launch that right now. We were just curious, finding out, let me see, in your experience, if you have any with portal-based solutions, what is the challenge that resonates most with you or has resonated most with you? So I'm going to leave this on just for a moment here, and then we'll hop back to the demonstration. All right, I am going to close out the poll now, and I'll share back the results so everybody can see them. It looks like user experience was the top with half of you saying that that has been the biggest pain point, was security, close second, and tied for second with audit and access control. All right. Thank you very much. Rob, I'll hand it back to you.
Great. And just to make sure that transition back resulted in my screen share, can you still see it, Emily?
Yes, I can see the inbox.
Great, great. So let me go through what an end-to-end experience looks like with the Virtru product. So we have developed and integrated directly into email environments so that end users can use the product how they normally do, ensuring that they don't have that adoption burden. In this case, this is a browser plugin. We have browser plugins, we have Outlook plugins, we have mobile applications on Android and iOS, ensuring that within the majority of major email platforms today, you can utilize the environment. So once that plugin is installed, the user really has to come in and compose an email like they normally would. So as I come in here and I add my recipients, you'll notice that there is a bar here at the top where you can simply toggle on the solution. And once that's in place, it's clearly indicative that this is protected. You'll notice we take over the send button, it says secure send. And at this point, I've already constructed an encryption policy. And I said that I'd turn the protection on. I've indicated that these two recipients are the recipients that should have access to this email. I did that on demand, but I'll show you in a little bit how you can enforce that. They can come down and compose their email like they normally would. And once they've done that, they can click secure send and be done. Now I'm going to show you some controls real quick that are optional, but I just want you to see them real quick. Right up here, this user can turn on disable forwarding, which means only these recipients can gain access to this email. If they were to forward it, that third party who you did not indicate should have access won't. They'll be denied. Expiration, exactly what you would expect. We implemented it a little different that I'll get into here in a moment, but at the end of this period of time, these recipients will no longer have access. And watermarking, some additional controls. That way, if it does get shared beyond that recipient, you can at least ensure or at least narrow down who has access to that. So these controls are optional but very powerful. They don't have to be put in place. You can just encrypt the email. So if I click secure send at this point, I'm done. This user can go back to what they're doing. They never had to leave their inbox, whether this was Outlook or in this case G Suite in Chrome. The recipients, let me show you what that looks like. I'll show you two different perspectives. This perspective is another browser user. So you'll notice here the browser plugin is here. We really tried to hook into the user experience. So when I click into this email, because I am a Virtru user here, in the background, we're authenticating and authorizing that user, ensuring that they still have access to this content, because remember, you can revoke, you can control, revoke, and reauthorize that content at any time. But I want to describe that first because when you click into that email, being a browser user, it's very seamless. You'll notice here that they can read this email right within their inbox. Ease of use. I don't have to go somewhere else. I don't have to create a separate username and password. Now, I did not decrypt this email and store it somewhere in the clear. You'll notice here, I'm looking at the raw email. This is kind of what's underneath the covers. You'll notice that this is still encrypted. Here's the encrypted payload. We have a patented encrypted search, which we can talk about if we have time today. There is no decryption of that email and storage somewhere. It's still protected. We're simply authenticating, authorizing, and presenting that user during this session that decrypted email. Same with Outlook. You'll notice when I come in and I click into these emails, there's an Outlook plugin here for Outlook. So if you are an Outlook user, that's fine. You can simply come in, install that plugin, and gain access to it right within your reading pane. No different than the browser plugin. No need to leave Outlook to gain access to that content. And we talked earlier about some of the control capabilities. So I've sent this email now. Maybe I didn't mean to, or maybe I sent it to the wrong recipient, or maybe the organization believes there is a breach and you want to revoke access to that content for while that investigation's underway. Two ways to do that. One way to do that is as the end user. So if I come in here and I click my sent mail, whether that's in Outlook or the browser, and I click on that email I just sent, you'll notice that it's still protected. It's protected wherever it goes at that point, which means that in this case, Google doesn't have access to the content and the recipient's email server doesn't have access to the content. Only the sender and the recipient do. You'll notice though, wherever that encrypted payload is, there's appropriate contextual controls. So I can drop down here and I can turn off the expiration. Say that recipient went on vacation and came back and said, hey, Rob, you sent me this email, but I've been gone. I apologize, I didn't tell you. Can you remove the expiration? You can remove it or you can add it back. Or in that case we were just discussing, I sent it to the wrong person. So you can just simply revoke that email. When you revoke that email, and those recipients, whether they're on their mobile device, browser, or Outlook, they try to gain access to it, no access is allowed. And that means whether you have the plugin installed or not. In this browser, I'm going to show you what the experience is like if I don't have the plugin. So if you're sending to someone that's never heard of Virtru before, they don't have access to it, or they can't install it, right? They can't install the browser plugin, they can't install the Outlook plugin, that's fine. Any modern browser will allow access. Now you'll notice I have a link here and I click into that. You're thinking that this is a portal. You're thinking that I'm going to create another username and password. Not true. Our secure reader here is what we call this. It is a web application that uses federated identity, which means that it uses open standards today like OAuth or SAML to authorize that user and perform all of the decryption on the recipient's system in their browser. So it's still end-to-end. We, Virtru, do not have access to that content. They click into who they are based on that email. They're presented with the authentication options available to them. So in this case, this is the OAuth we were talking about because this is a Google customer. Or we have one-time passwords. So we'll click into the Google option, which is going to authorize me based on this session and bring me right into a reading experience. I did not have to create another username and password here. So as you can see, whether you're the sender or the recipient, whether you have the plugin or not, it's a very seamless experience and it gives you that end-to-end protection we talked about earlier and the control. Any given time you can revoke or reauthorize that content. Another place where you can do the same thing is what we call our dashboard. So I've sent that email, or I've sent a bunch of emails. The dashboard is kind of an administrative panel. It's also a location for users to see all of the encryption policies they've created, and it gives you a slightly different perspective. So in this case, this email was sent to 2 people. One of the individuals forwarded to a third party. We give you full access to this forwarding tree, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 recipients. You can see who has access to your data, under what conditions, and how the data got there. That's really important for you to see whether something's being shared unnecessarily, whether you need to come in, even after you've sent it, turn on disable forwarding and revoke access to this one recipient. You have full control to do that. This is very powerful given today that these cloud ecosystems make it very easy to share data. We also talked earlier, just in the beginning of the demo, about how I did that manually. I clicked that little toggle at the top, but you can also enforce it at the organizational level. So in this case, we give you what we call our rules engine. It's a data loss prevention framework, really. And you can have basic text patterns. You can have more complicated text patterns. And I'm going to demonstrate this. You can have what I call route-based encryption. So if I want to encrypt everything going to one person, or if I want to encrypt everything going to one domain, say you have a business relationship with a third party where every communication between the two of you should be encrypted, you can enforce that. Or you have complex rules that allows you to take your existing policies and procedures, what you're identifying as secure within your organization, maybe form identifiers or something unique to the way in which you process data, build a rule that matches that data and if matched, perform encryption. So through this rules engine, which is very intuitive and very straightforward, you can enforce those rules, and I'll demonstrate that. You'll notice here at the top, I have social security number. I've got it set to warn. So let's come back over here. Let's show you what that looks like. So I have a window here where I've put in a valid but dummy social security number. This is a test number, and I have the protection turned off, you'll notice. So when I click send, we're going to present to that user. I said the action I indicated there was warn. You could just say encrypt, and it would just encrypt this and send it on its way. But warn is a very powerful tool. Sometimes some data is hard to identify because it's so like a bunch of other data, right? It's very generic. In this case, this warn is a great way to decentralize some of this detection to your end users, who in this case are sourcing the data. So in many times they're subject matter experts. We highlight the data, you can hover over and see what we think it is, and the user can send in the clear or send secure. You can enforce the encryption, but I just wanted to show what warn would look like. And they simply click secure send, and it's on its way. So whether that's on demand or enforced by a rule, same experience applies for your end users. So let me hop back over real quick to our slides. Give me 1 second here. There we go. And we will finish up these last few slides and then go into Q&A. So as an example, as I said, we have a lot of great customers. Spend a lot of time with them learning about the problems that they are discovering and are having when adopting cloud environments, or just even on-prem as well, not just the cloud environments. And a lot of great information has come out of this, and I really appreciate a lot of this feedback. Copt is one of those customers that before Virtru had used a number of legacy tools and vendors to protect their environment. Because of that, they did not have as cohesive of a management framework or an enforcement framework, because they had to use multiple solutions. And while doing their due diligence on Office 365, determined that the controls inherent in Office 365 or provided within there were not enough. There is more that is needed in order to ensure end-to-end protection and control of that content, both internally and externally. With Virtru, we've been able to enable them to have secure collaboration with external auditors via on-demand and DLP enforced policies. Because of that ease of use and because of that tightly integrated experience with these cloud environments, a very easy deployment, minimal training, and because of that, high adoption rates. Remember, if the users won't use it, it is of no use to your security program. And because of our deep integration in these environments, very seamless single sign-on experience with Okta. So you can see how these problems likely come into some of your current or future states based on where you're at in the life cycle of some of these environments probably will resonate with you and how we've solved this for customers today. Archaea is another example. Large financial firm using on-premise technology to meet their privacy concerns. They have some international constraints as well, especially around their country's constraints, normal regulatory requirements for their industry, and of course GDPR. And because of all those constraints, they've uncovered a lot of data protection requirements, as I was discussing before, that are either clearly spelled out or in the spirit of those regulations during that due diligence. And they were just unable to adopt some of the cloud environments because of these regulatory concerns and need to gain access to and control of those encryption keys and protected data. Keeping that data away from those that do not need access, vendors or servers or users along the way, and gaining access and control of those keys was critical. With Virtru, we met that end-to-end protection need and ensuring that they had to trust a minimum number of parties, the sender and the recipient. They don't even have to trust Virtru in that case because we don't have access to the content. They also deployed a key technology virus called the customer key server. So the customer key server is really pretty powerful. It gives you even one more layer of abstraction. It uses an additional set of encryption keys that you store on premise in your environment to protect the keys that we're already utilizing underneath with our primary non-CKS deployments. This gives them one more layer of abstraction, one more point of control that does not burden the user experience you saw earlier, that they can store on site and meet their regulatory requirements. And because of this, Archaea is deploying to all of their 14,000 users to help them adopt the cloud ecosystems that they needed to move their business forward. So again, let's go back to that modern checklist as one last slide here, and let's see how Virtru and end-to-end encryption stacks up to meet that need. Seamless user experience. You saw an integrated experience that is right there where the user works in the compose window in the inbox, that did not demand additional username and passwords to be set up and still gave you the end-to-end encryption. That end-to-end encryption ensures that only the sender and the recipient have access to that content, and that you do not have to trust any of the vendors and parties along the way. You saw through the dashboard and in your sent items that you can see who has access, have they accessed it, have they forwarded it, and if necessary, the ability to control, revoke, or change those conditions at any given time. Full control over that content after you've protected it. You saw how, because we are agnostic of the recipient, whether that's internal or external, our DLP rules or on-demand protection can ensure that you can protect both internal and external communications. Internal to internal is completely seamless, and internal to external is either one click through the secure reader, which you saw with the web app, or if they have the plugin, completely seamless as well. There's no difference between that internal and external protection in the Virtru world. We give you that control. And painless administration. Hard to demonstrate there, but you saw the simple rules interface. The deployment is also very simple as well. We worked very hard to deeply integrate into your email environment so that you can, with as few clicks as possible, enable the product and enable your users to start protecting the content. And with a little additional effort, you can enable some of those rules to auto-enforce some of the protections that are important to your policies and procedures and your regulatory burdens. So I hope that was helpful. And Emily, if we have time left, I would love to take some questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, great. And just a reminder, there's a questions box right in your GoToWebinar panel, so please feel free to leave questions there. And here's a few to start. Where are Virtru keys hosted?
Yeah, so there's a, depending on which deployment method you use, we use what's called a split key architecture, meaning that some of the sensitive information, some of the key information goes with the email payload. And the importance of this is that we store a key, and some of the secret information, some of the keys are in the email itself. So what that means is that Virtru does not have access to decrypt that content. It must be post-authorization, the key we store combined with the secrets inside the email itself in order to decrypt. This is where the split knowledge comes in. This is where you do not have to trust Virtru because we don't have access to the content. With the customer key server we discussed earlier, in addition to those multiple keys we just discussed, you can store a key server on premise in your environment or in your cloud hosting environment that allows you to create another public-private key pair to encrypt the keys we just discussed. So that way you have keys yourself in addition to the key we store in our environment.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Let me just see here. Besides my organization, who can access my unencrypted content?
Yeah, no one. So only the authorized parties. So when you, your organization protects an email or protects an attachment or protects a file, you indicate who and under what conditions. So at that point, you've created an encryption policy. That encryption policy is what directs who can, post-authentication, gain access to the keys necessary to decrypt that content. So only your organization and the recipient authorized by you can gain access to that content.
Okay, great. Let me see. Does Virtru work on mobile?
It does. So we so to provide the end-to-end encryption that we discussed earlier, we actually have a native Android and a native iPhone application. This allows you to securely view encrypted emails on your mobile device and securely create secure emails on your device, which are still end-to-end because they're native applications on the device. So you install it like a mail app, and it allows you to read and create secure emails on your mobile device.
Okay. What does Virtue add on top of capabilities from Microsoft or Google?
Well, there's several important takeaways there. One of those is what we discussed earlier around really being agnostic of where that data goes. So whether you're sending internally or sending externally, the same ability to protect, control, and give you visibility into who has access and under what conditions, regardless of whether that's internal in Microsoft or Google or external, regardless of what kind of environment the recipient has. We give a seamless experience across the board. Ease of use is another key differentiator. We focus very heavily on user experience. So where possible, we hook into where the user works, giving you the ability to drive an awareness campaign that results in individuals that will use the product. And then that portability of control. So in addition to just protecting it end-to-end, being able to revoke, disable forwarding, extend watermarking, extend restrictions to that content regardless of where it's at, is really the important takeaways and differentiators from some of these other environments.
Excellent. Thank you. As we're waiting for other questions to come in, I am going to launch one more poll. We're very interested in finding out how relevant this talk was to your organization. So if you could just take a moment to answer, that would be fantastic. Thank you. All right, I will just close this off now and share back. Well, that's great. 75% said very relevant and 25 somewhat. So this is good. Thank you so much. And let's head back to questions. Can an administrator revoke messages on behalf of their users?
So we have an administrative access control system that allows you to indicate administrators that have the ability to see the encryption policies or revoke encryption policies. Now, those administrators don't necessarily have access to the content. They just have access to that dashboard where they can, if there's an event or an incident and they need to go in and revoke that policy, they can, but it depends on if they're given the ability to do so.
Great, thank you. And I've got one last question. So if anybody has any other questions, please put them here. If not, we'll wrap up after. How does Virtue differ from Zix email encryption?
So Zix provides a portal-based solution fundamentally, and commonly deployed as an edge device that stores a copy of that email and sends a link to the recipient, allowing them to come back in and create that another username or password. Again, Virtue really focuses on user experience, ease of use, and end-to-end protection. So we are creating that high level of security and encrypting that content with split knowledge separation as soon as it's created, ensuring that wherever that data is, it is protected. And you don't have to trust whether that copy of that email is being secured in that portal environment. Okay, great. I think that's it for questions. We'd like to take our time and say thank you so much for joining us today. We will be sharing this recording back with you tomorrow in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with any of your colleagues. And a huge thanks to Rob. Thank you so much, Rob. No, thanks everybody for taking the time. I sure appreciate it.
Yeah. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.